see it all laid out there in front of me, it makes it easier to move forward with the rest of my day. So body, mind, spirit. Oh, I didn't talk about my mind practice yet. This is actually before I started my workout too. I read a couple pages every day. I'm finishing up a book right now about mental toughness by a guy who's an ex-Navy SEAL, David Goggins, or maybe he's still a SEAL. But anyway, this is about his time in the
Once a
SEALs.
seal, always a seal, they say.
Yeah, yeah, but just fantastically inspiring. Some of the stuff that this guy David Goggins has been through and the example he sets. I mean, really, we're all capable of so much more than we ever thought we were, and seeing the way he pushed through some of the setbacks in his life, not to mention all the crazy stuff that he went through in SEAL training and some of the other challenges he's done. I'm getting towards the end of this book and reading now about his attempt to break the world record for number of pull-ups completed in 24 hours and some of the struggles he
Oh,
faced in preparing for and going for that. Anyway, so mind, body, spirit, and shadow, and I hit all four of those every morning. Practice today was great. How about you, John?
awesome.
How's your practice going?
Yeah, well, today I did, as you probably know if you're watching this, that Doug and I work with a company called iAwake Technologies, and I am the CEO, and he is the CTO, and that he does other stuff too. But we just have to have a title, and he's really good with the technological stuff. Thank you, Doug. But I did a track called Infinity that was actually created by Doug, and I did the song of Infinity. There's two tracks. They're about an hour, and it starts off in alpha, theta, beta, delta, or something like that, and then about 27 minutes it kicks you into lambda, which is a really interesting brainwave. Say brand new for iAwake. I mean, it's the first track that we've really used it on, and it's a very high above gamma track embedded in a very low, like burrito of epsilon, and it's really a very powerful focusing thing. It's not for sissies. Anyway, so I did that, and then I went to the club, the gym that I belong to, which is a beautiful place. I just love it, because it has great tennis courts, clay and hard courts, and a wonderful gym. And I'm into all of that stuff. So I did 30 minutes on the cardio, and then I do about 15 minutes of very focused, not not flirting or talking at the water fountain, though I probably should do that to work on my social skills a little more, but just really focus. And today the body parts were the legs. So I did leg presses, calf raises, uh, in and out, and basic is done. And today, because I had to get back for the podcast, I didn't do a core thing, but I usually do some example of that. And keep looking at the weather, and hopefully I might be able to play some tennis today. I'm really into tennis, and I love it. And I'm working on my serve right now. I'm trying to revamp that, and that is if you've ever played tennis, or it's one of the more complicated things in the sports world to do, is a good tennis serve. So I'm working on that.
Tennis is a great game because not only are you getting that cardiovascular fitness, but you're really building that mind-body connection to all the focus and attention and opportunity. You can really get into flow when you're playing tennis.
When it happens, it's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, you just get to the point where you kind of know where the ball's going to go before it comes to you, and you're already moving that direction. Anyway, it can be very spiritual or be frustrating as hell. It's a really complex game, and you have to work on every aspect of it. So, all that to say, back to the original thing we were talking about. It's like, is there a solution for every problem that we're confronting as human beings? And I think I mentioned this on the first show, but a while back when Trump got elected, it was a real shocker, for a lot of us. Like, what? I think it was a shocker for him too. But I was just blown away. I couldn't believe it, because man represents everything I really despise in myself. It's like narcissism and being a bully and just all these just basic human traits that I've really fought against in and out of myself, and tried not to do that ever. And so anyway, it was a hard time. It was a very
Yeah,
spiritual time. I had
talk
to go
about
deep.
shadow, John. I mean, he's got these things inside themselves that we all try to disown. I'm not like that at all. But if you really look, do you have those tendencies that maybe you've outgrown? I don't know. That's a good point to think on for sure.
Yeah. So but anyway, Ken Wilber wrote I don't know, it's about 100 pages, a short book or article paper. It was called Trump and the Post-Truth Era, I believe. And it was really helpful. And he said, this is just kind of an evolutionary going back a couple of stages just to kind of reorganize and figure out what we weren't doing, on kind of the cutting edge, or at least the progressive and the green, how we were failing or how that group was failing, and why this strong reaction against that. And that, of course, that conversation is still going on. But in this thing, Ken said the answer to every problem that faces humanity is developmental. Developmental. And I was like, boy, that is really kind of simplistic and broad and blah, 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 blah. And I started thinking about it, and it was, oh, yeah. Well, let's think about it. For example, there's never been a famine in a democracy. Think about it. Why? Is it because democracies have more food? Maybe they do. But they certainly have more communication, and then we have a more system. You just move emergency stuffs to wherever. Of course, we had, if you look at Katrina, that may be a reaction against that. The government response to the Hurricane Katrina and the people that were just, stuck in the Superdome and they weren't doing anything. It's not exactly a famine, but it was horrible neglect, I thought. But anyway, so I started
certainly
thinking
you have
about
people starving in a democracy, in a capitalist economy like we have there. Other problems there. There's poverty, and there's starvation, and there are those kind of things. But you're right.
But not a famine,
right,
per se.
Right.
There's just not enough food, and everybody. You may not have enough money to buy food, and you're hungry all the time. But it's not because there's no food. That's another issue, which is also can be answered developmentally. So the idea and one of the cornerstones of integral thinking is realizing that there are developmental stages. And I kind of start off in my book, I actually have a copy here, Integral Recovery. And I use spiral dynamics, Don Beck and Cohen and others who have worked on this, as we have too. And basically it's color coded, and some people have different codes and little different interpretations of it, but I'll just start at one that we still see running around a lot, and that's red. And that's kind of bloody red. It's like the developmental, ethical, moral ground of, gangs. All right. The Crips and the Bloods and the Aryan Brotherhood and MS-13 or whatever, all these things. It's like you have strong men, usually men, who are the leaders, and they force their dominance on others by being violent and intimidating. And, you follow the leader. And this goes back thousands of years in our history, when people started, chieftains and kings were arising that were able to organize, large groups of people and move into territories inhabited by others and enslave them or kill them and take over their lands. And we still see that represented in humanity now, but it's a pretty low level of development. After that, blue or true blue came on, and that was the kind of the ethos of the morals that developed out of the great, they call it the axial age, where the great teachers arose. So maybe you're starting with the Vedic teachings out of the Hindus and Buddhism and Lao Tzu. Sorry if I'm missing anybody. Judaism, Christianity, and probably the last part of that was Muhammad and Islam. And these are, there's a lot of very evolutionary, advancing things that come out of this level of morality. In other words, there's a teaching, there's a truth, there's a prophet, there's a scripture, there's an ultimate thing that we should be moving towards. It involves self-sacrifice and treating your neighbors as yourself in most cases, and or at least the people within the in group. And so it was really reformed some of the bloody practices of what preceded it. But again, it had its own issues and own problems, and got pretty bloody in the Christian Catholic sense. It got barbecuey, not so bloody, right? You weren't supposed to spill blood. So that was their interpretation of the scriptures, but it was okay to cook people. So strange. But anyway, but the problem being that there's only one truth. So if you do not buy into that truth, you are outside of the chosen circle, the chosen people, the church, however the Sangha, however you want to put that, and you are not completely fully human. You can be proselytized and converted, or you can be killed or treated less than. All right. So that's got some problems, and it caused a lot of bloody religious wars, which are continuing as these levels conflict in the Middle East, where you have the Shia and the Sunni and all these different divisions, same religion, believe in the same, God, Allah, and but they hate each other, and they've hated each other from the beginnings, way back to the beginnings of Islam, which I don't want to get into now, but it involved the Ali, son-in-law of Muhammad, being assassinated and killed. So that split the Shia and the Sunni. And of course, you see that, with the divisions in Christianity and the Protestant and the Catholic thing, and up till, very recently we saw that manifested in Belfast in Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants going after each other. And that's calmed down a bit. I was just in Belfast last year. Yeah. So anyway, so something, and each new level develops because the current dominant level, or the cutting edge level at that time, is not offering solutions to arising problems. And when modernity, or they call it orange and spiral dynamics, came on the scene with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, a lot of that was brought about by the fact that the religious faith-based answers were not helping with real world problems, such as the Black Death.
The things you were talking about earlier, famine and disease and,
right.
Those kind of things. Okay.
Right. And so you started going, okay, well, let's do some things differently. Let's look at science. Let's look at provable reproducible experiments that show us how the universe functions. Let's, even before that, why don't we just, instead of the scriptures being in the Christian sense in a dead language that nobody but the elite could read in Latin, why don't we print it up in the language of the common people? And it started in Germany with Gutenberg. So that just changed everything. I was like, oh, wow. I don't have to read the scriptures. I don't have to listen to the priest. I can read it myself. And hopefully God's Spirit can, help me interpret it, but no priest, no mediator, just me, the scriptures, Spirit, and God. Okay. So that gave rise to modernity and the dignity and the importance of the individual instead of just the group. Okay. And from that, of course, rose a lot of things, but a great example of that is the United States and Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and we believe holy truths to be self-evident, that every individual, okay, talking about the individual, not just your responsibility of the group. And that changed things in a big way. It's still changing the world.
It was the first time in history, right, that people really thought about people outside their own in-group. They saw across the world, across the culture and the boundaries, and were able to see the whole world, that all individuals were equal. That's the dawning of, I guess Ken calls it the world-centric view. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly it. And at that level, at the beginning, because when you're still kind of embedded in fundamentalist blue religious, there's only one perspective, one way, we used to say back in the day, right? And Jesus said, and there's one truth. And if you're not, you're in error, and you need to be saved. You need to be converted. But beginning with modernity, you start able to see things through other people's eyes. Oh, that there's other perspectives. Okay, and so that's just a huge leap forward, and it brought about capitalism and the rise of Western technology that has obviously Chinese, a lot of people contributed to it, but it really got going industrially, where everybody could have access to to modernity, probably in the West, and starting with England, United States, and the Industrial Revolution, etc. And that changed, the whole thing. Of course, when you take individual rights to the extreme, it becomes just extreme narcissism. And you go, because you have problems. That creates its own problems. And uncontrolled capitalism, where you get into this Ayn Randian thing that, the individual is the only thing that matters, and us geniuses will collect all the tinker toys, and to hell, the rest of you just fertilizer for our greatness or whatever. It's pretty perverted and twisted. And it's not able to answer problems like poverty and hunger. Yeah. And it's had a very hard time dealing with, made some inroads, but dealing with pollution and screwing up the environment, whether it's global warming or some other catastrophe.
Yeah, what were you going to say? As many problems as that kind of system, that capitalist system solved, we certainly created our fair share of them along the way.
Yeah, as well as
we're destroying this world, and the inequalities that emerge, and ill treatment of people. What happened? What was the level of development that came online as a solution to that?
Yeah, and also there's a lot of great things that modernity. The fact that I'm 62 and I still have all my chompers, and I'm pretty, I'm doing pretty well. And I read someplace that antibiotics, though, they're horrible for us. Well, they've given each one of us on average in the West about 30 extra years of life. Antibiotics, Jesus, that's a great thing. Thank you. 30 years is, you can do a lot or do very little, but it's a long time. So, and because of the problems of dealing with capitalism and inequality and stuff that Orange or capitalism didn't seem to be able to deal with very well, there arose the postmodern or green. Okay. And that started in the United States. I mean, there's always people, that are ahead of their times by 100, 200, 300 years or so, but they're very small individuals. But it's not until a certain meme, they call these moral memes, come online, and about 10% of the people in any given population start to be that a real transformation happens. And so in the 50s, we had the green movement arrive, which started with civil rights in the late 50s, and women's rights, animal rights, Native American rights, Hispanic rights, gay rights, everybody's rights. And of course, as those of you who listen to, read Ken Wilber's work, what was his deconstruction of the postmodern? Came out 20 years ago. It was the mean green meme. It was Boomeritis.
Yeah.
Yeah, great book. If you never read it, it's totally weird. If you've read other Ken Wilber stuff, it's very funny, and it's a fictional account, and it's really something. So, but the whole thing, the kind of the Derrida, the postmodern stuff that came out of France, and it seems to have gotten deeply into universities on the East and West Coast of the United States, and definitely in Canada, where the whole masculinity, feminine, gender thing, and LGBTQ, and all of this, and changing language, and the idea that everything is culturally constructed, and there are no absolutes, and there's no difference between men and women. It's just a cultural thing. So if mommy, you're a boy and put a dress on you and gave you, dolls and did all this stuff, you would turn into a woman. There's no difference. It's all cultural, which is patently absurd. Yeah. I mean,
and there are a lot of things that are cultural for sure, but to pin everything on that, it's like there are bell curves, right? Just to talk about one that I think most people will be able to agree on. Take the idea of raw strength, for example. There are plenty of women who are stronger than plenty of men, but if you look at these overlapping bell curves on average, most people are going to agree that a male-bodied person, and that's the terminology that I'm going to use, is stronger. But a lot of good things emerged out of that movement too, and this is one of these can't throw the baby out with the bathwater cases, because certainly where all these complex constellations of different personality traits, some of which are more masculine and some of which are more feminine, and figuring out where we are and being careful about the labels and the verbiage that we put on all that. I mean, there's a place for that. Certainly there was good to it, but the problem is, well, you were going there, so I'll let you go there. I just wanted to make sure and say, the leading edge is the leading edge for a reason.
Yes. But there's two types of green that I've noticed. When I first read Boomeritis, I was like, what? I hadn't been exposed to that type of postmodernism, intellectual university postmodern. I went to the university in Texas. We didn't have that much. And then later, when I was at grad school and I taught in university myself, I wasn't exposed to that much. But then I became exposed to it as time went on. And I was more exposed with the postmodern or the green. It's like the really nice green meme, the hippie thing, right? The people that had, were getting back to nature, people that had experienced psychedelics and music and the Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan and all the transformative psychedelic stuff and Jimi Hendrix, all the music and cultural things that came out of the mid to late 60s and into the 70s. And that was a whole different thing than this very rigid kind of neo-Marxist stuff. Postmodernism. And what's the difference between that postmodern and the other postmodern? And the hippie thing had its problems too. And I was very embedded in it for years. I was in San Francisco. I was involved and I was a poet, a singer songwriter, protest singer, involved in the psychedelic movement at the time with, knew Sasha and Shulgin, and was part of that kind of broader community that were experimenting with all this stuff. But is that because using psychedelics, people have transcendent experiences and they have mythic experience where you seem to get in touch with greater wisdom than a transcendent wisdom, but it's not just random wisdom. It seems to verify what the great mystics and the great teachers have been saying all along. That's all one, it's all good, that we should be kind to one another. We should love one another, that all life is sacred and needs to be treated like that. So, these things were very different kind of hit on postmodernism than kind of the neo-Marxist kind of mean shit that's happening in the schools that Ken Wilber and Jordan Peterson and many others have been deconstructing the deconstructionists, and it's not hard to do. So all of those problems. And the thing about the other part of green is kind of the hippie thing is that we often thought that modernism was the enemy, so that science and intellectualism was dry and just creating awful weapons and ways of exploiting nature and people, that was all bad. And so we shouldn't really, God, dude, you're in your head. We shouldn't think that much. We should just feel and be real. And that's well and good, because one of the things that green, at least the kind of the softer, nicer green brings on, is respecting for emotions and feelings at a deep level that that modernity couldn't quite get to. They could get to it intellectually, but not so much experientially. So that takes us with postmodernism to kind of the top of what in spiral dynamics in they talk about as being first tier. And so that you have these different levels that arise historically and individually. We all start at square one and we have to progress to these levels of development. And some of us don't get any further than, I don't know, where the general center of gravity in our particular culture. So if you live in Kansas or a red state agriculture thing, you're probably very easy just to hang out in blue and kind of be there, and then if you live, if you grew up in the Bay Area or on the West Coast, it's really pretty, there's a lot of support to go into postmodern and green. And if you live in Chicago or Houston, the orange, so it just kind of depends where you're at. But the problem is, and this has been exploited a lot, that most of these levels think that the other levels are completely wrong. Okay. And orange, thinks that the postmodern are idiots, both the mean green meme and the nice green meme, are tree hugging, soft-minded, just took too much acid when they were kids or something like that. And the other one is controlling and nasty and just, creating chaos. And they're the ones that are holding everything together and keeping the economy going and the blue, the fundamentalists will think that, you know, that although there's been a lot of connection there because of the politics, but they often think that the capitalists are just loving mammon and chasing the buck, and you know, are lost souls, and that the hippies or the green mean are tree hugging pagans, and the others are just, what would the other? They're just homosexual nutcases, right? And like, not homosexuality. Don't try to force equality of this thing that we think is an absolute abomination and sin down our throats.
Yeah, at that level, everybody's going to hell except for us, right? Because, you know, we're the only ones who have we're the chosen people. Everybody else is going to hell. And you're pointing at something that is, I think, the key to all of this, which is that these levels all believe they're the only right one. Every level believes they're the only right one, and that's why nobody can talk and nobody can agree on things, and we can't get to these next level solutions across the board, even in this country, let alone across the world. And the problems we're facing today, certainly there are individual psychological issues that growing up will help, but a lot of the issues we're facing as we deplete the resources of this planet and engage in global trade and global commerce, they affect everybody. And so the cultural miscommunications anymore aren't just among groups of people who are living in the same town or the same city, but all of us in vastly different cultures. You were talking about growing up in San Francisco versus growing up in Oklahoma or something like that in a small town, and man, that's a cultural difference that's tiny compared to some of the things we're looking at across the world these days.
We are very divided as a nation now, and it's pretty painful. It's getting worse because it's really been exploited, you know, through television and the internet, and people for political reasons, for political gains, instead of drawing us together. So when the postmodernists try to force their LGBTQ ideas on fundamentalists, man, what you do is you don't change their attitudes, you reinforce their anger and their hatred of all things gay or different. Okay, because there's one way of being, and it's diversity. So what do you have to do? Well, that's where the next level begins to kick in. And in Spiral Dynamics, they called it second tier, who they said what was the quote? The guy that started off the idea of spiral dynamics, studying these things. I write about him in my book. His name escapes me at the moment. But he says when you go from second tier, from first tier to second tier, it's not just a next level, but you're passing, you're going over a huge canyon, a huge divide of meaning that changes everything.
Monumental leap of meaning.
A monumental leap of meaning, exactly. So it's not just one more tier and one more swirl in the spiral there. It's a huge step forward, and it's realization that all of these levels that are represented in our culture they're there. We all have to go through them. They're evolutionarily part of what it means to grow into the next level, developmental levels of humanity. And each one has its strengths that needs to be brought forward. And each one has its weaknesses that need to be kind of minimized if possible. So, I mean, there's wonderful things in the fundamentalist Christian belief. There's unselfishness. There's putting a higher power first. There's sacrifice. There's courage. There's bravery. There's faith. These are all values that can be taken all the way up. And of course, what they mean will be different at different stages. They'll be much added onto and much transformed, but they're all very basic. And if you don't get them when you're at the appropriate age, you're going to have major deficits in your edifice. And either the thing is going to get really wobbly and you're going to have all kinds of problems, or you're going to have to go back and do some reconstructive work to fix those things that you didn't get in the first place. Okay. And, a lot of our young people have not gotten it where they could get it either from their parents or from churches and stuff. So we have a lot of just lostness and existential kind of just going back and forth because they didn't get that strong, firm moral foundation. And of course, orange or modernity, the mind, inventiveness, creativity, ambition, creating new things, taking problems on and solving them, getting things done, being able to put things together. And of course, in the green, or at least in the nice green meme, you have deep caring, and everybody's invited to be part of the party. So, whether you're Native American, it's like, oh, wow, Native American, that's awesome. It's not you dumb Indian. I mean, it's like that goes away. It's like, for example, if a blue person goes to San Francisco, they go, oh my God, there's gay people and Chinese people and Mexican people and black people and all these weirdos running around. This is horrible. It's the end of civilization. It's just like the Roman Empire, right? Blah, blah, blah. And a green person goes and goes, oh God, it's so cool. There's so much diversity. It's so rich. So you have two people looking at the exact same situations and having an absolute opposite reaction. So that's challenging at times, but there's a big heart opening, there's real caring about things, about nature and about people other than yourselves and the disadvantaged, etc. Of course. And then of course you get into, and I think even the academic postmodern, where you're, identity politics is a big buzzword right now. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, almost all politics is identity politics. And I don't quite get it. I get what they're saying, but I'd like to, Jordan Peterson, he really gets on that about, and white privilege, you can't say that, that's bad. But it's like, I'd say, well, he's done some really good lectures on the Old Testament that everybody should listen to if you're interested in the Old Testament and Jungian psychology. It's pretty brilliant when it comes to there. But I'd like to ask him, it's like when Moses went before Pharaoh, he said, thus saith the Lord, let my people go. He didn't say, let your people go. He didn't say, let all people go. He said, let my people go. Well, that's identity politics, children of Israel. So
yeah, I would say not only if you're interested in the Old Testament, but especially if you're not, because that might help you get it.
There you go.
Develop some interest in, maybe there was actually something worth considering in there. This thing that I had just written off because my culture, the group of people that I grew up with, didn't emphasize that, and it's a good way to kind of help us see the wisdom that was there.
Yeah, and Ken said one time, I said, bidden or not, the ground of being always shows its hoary head. And I don't think he said hoary head, but it's always there. You can't, every time there's been a movement to, disavow God or disavow transcendent, disavow spirituality, spirit, it's just, you won't be able to, it's not a viable position because this experience thereof is built into us, into our brains and the very beings we are. And so these mystical experiences, of which I've had a bunch, are there. And you can read about them, and you can do things to facilitate it. You can do meditation and prayer, and you can do meditation and prayer facilitated by the tools that we now have, such as iAwake. You can judiciously use psychedelics, which I think is a really important thing that's coming back around, and should be considered and talked about with respect and gravitas. And but should be addressed, and I've had quite a bit of experience with that, and it opened me up in ways that have stayed with me for decades now.
So do you think, John, that's a tool that can help with development, that can help people ascend this evolutionary ladder and make that monumental leap of meaning?
Yeah. And I've just kind of like got back into reconsidering it over the last couple of years, because a lot of the colleagues that, people that I work with in the transformational technology community, world movement, and the spiritual technology movement are recognizing these things. And I think, the 60s were very influenced by it, but in a lot of ways it was used really unwisely. Like, you weren't meant to do acid and go to junior high school. I mean, hello, we were doing things like that. So, yeah, but now I think now we've known, there's been kind of enough time has passed, so there's not just this political animosity towards these psychedelic substances. When I was a young kid growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, we were smoking our pot, and in the halls of Congress they were swilling their scotch. And we didn't like each other a bit, so that stuff was like,
Well, that's,
really squelch.
Nixon trying to quash the anti-war movement, right, by suppressing that kind of stuff, because those people who are using psychedelics and expanding their consciousness, and this is before my time, but this is the way I hear it anyway, that it was really an effort to control that so that the war could continue in Vietnam.
Well, yeah, you take mushrooms and you think about napalming people in Vietnam for whatever reason. It's just no. No, that's no, just no. And I'll figure out the details, but no, is that reaction against that as this new level of consciousness emerged. But interestingly enough, in more enlightened conservative circles, and there are such things I've come to recognize, the psychedelics are now being encouraged, and marijuana is becoming legal more and more and more all the country, and hemp has become legal. And I'm not a big fan of getting stoned on pot. It's just not good for me. I want to eat all of creation. Then I get paranoid and feel awful. So I know other people must be having experiences that are much more pleasant than that. But I have been using CBD oil. That's really been helping. I had a heart attack, 8 or 9 months ago. And I think it's a great part of me. So that's kind of changed my rigid attitudes toward pot, because I work integral recovery. I worked in the addiction field. And can you become addicted to marijuana? Absolutely, you can. I've seen it a lot. And I was talking to a naturopath physician the other day, and she said that that men are much more prone to become alcoholics. No, it's women. I'm sorry, just reverse that. Are easier to get more into alcohol, and men really tend towards smoking pot. And I know that's a generalization, but statistically, there's some validation there. And of course, she lives in an area in Colorado where you have both. So I would rather see somebody be a pothead than an alcoholic, right? Or a heroin addict or a meth addict or something like that. I mean, among these addictive substances. And of course, not everybody has that propensity to become a marijuana addict. But if you do, be cool, and if you can do it, great. If you can't, don't. But I think there's a lot of good medicinal things can come out of it. And of course, the CBD oil that I use has a little THC, but it's not mind altering. At least at the doses that I do it, I don't feel it. It just helps me sleep, and they said there's a lot of physical help that you can get. So I've kind of changed okay, let's look at this thing. And now that psychedelics are coming back, I think that can be an important thing. However, with this stipulation, just doing psychedelics by themselves is not enough. Okay? It's just not enough. Been there, done that. And sometimes it can be terrible because you get into this reality, you experience God or Buddha nature, or ultimate consciousness, and this thing that is so beyond our walking around consciousness. And it's can be very scary, but it also can be absolutely inspiring and uplifting and beautiful. But then you come down. And you still have, none of your, most of your neurosis are still intact. Most of everything, your problems are still there, but you've had a vision of something way beyond. And it's kind of, oh God, it can be depressing. So what do I do? Take more psychedelics, stay high all the time. Well, we tried that. Doesn't work. So how can we take these powerful transcendent experiences brought on by psychedelics and make them something useful that we can stabilize and carry forward and do good things and be happy and help others? Well, I would say you have to stabilize it with ongoing integral practice, right? Yes. Before you take the substances, even during, I'm sure it would be pretty good to do some of the meditative things that we've developed and afterwards. So this can be something that can hold it, contain it, and channel it and stabilize it. So it's not just a temporary state experience, right? That comes and goes. And Ken Wilber's talking about states and stages. Stages are stages of development, okay? Stages of moral valuation and the capacity to take other perspectives, on and on, gets higher and higher, more and more perspectives. And you can judge these perspectives and put them in some kind of order, not just all of a sudden you see everything from everybody's eyes and you're left in complete confusion. You can actually work with it in a useful way. But if we're not just, so we have to realize that these state experiences can be very informative and very healthy to blow us out of our kind of set mindsets, our constructed realities that were handed to us or that we created through our own traumas and own experiences, and break us out of that and give us some freedom. But to get to the stages, it takes hard work, dedicated, heroic work to get there. And why should we get there? Well, this is where it all comes back to what we started with, is that it's only at these higher levels will we be able to solve the global and divisive human problems that are facing us right now, because you begin to understand and have compassion and can see into that young ISIS guy's mindset, and you can see into the 30% or whatever it is, Trump's base, and you can see into the fundamentalist Christian, and you can see into the university professor who's trying to bring justice to the world by this kind of new way of thinking and new speaking, and address these issues in their own ways. And so all of this you begin to be able to put together and see it's all God. It's all this thing that is and that we are, that we have been and that we're becoming. And how do we deal with this intelligently, with maybe more even intelligent, with great wisdom and compassion, and how do we listen to other people in a deep way? And how do we become a voice for regeneration and recreation and understanding? And so it's practice, and it's talking and listening to one another and respecting one another. I mean, my God, if I'd have been born gay, what that meant for me. And I do believe you're born this way. I don't think it's something you choose. Maybe so. Maybe there's some of us are like 50-50, or kind of both ways, and then we can choose to go over way we want. I don't know, but definitely it's not what I was given. And I was like, wow, I'm grateful, because it's been hard enough. My road's been hard enough without that, So when I first started understanding gay people, or understanding people were gay and what that meant, and all the heat and hatred they got, I just felt so sorry for them. Like, you didn't choose this; you're just being yourself, And this happened when I was, my early teens. I started to see this and realize it. So I've always been an advocate, defender of gay folks, because I just thought, hey, it's just what it is, And if you're pissed off about gayness, then be pissed at God, He seems to be creating this. Like 10% of us, they say, I don't know, but they're all part of our family. So,
yeah, it's hard to solve problems of the scale we're facing if we can't see into the perspective of others, and that really applies when we're working on global problems and interpersonal problems too. To see and understand what's happening there, and practice is the guaranteed way to get there. The meditative states are exactly about getting to that expanded level of consciousness where we can see other perspectives and realize that we're all part of the same consciousness. It's all God, as you said. It's all Brahman, and I am that. And the psychedelics could be a powerful tool to get you there, precisely because they change your sensory perception in such a way, neurochemically speaking, that the self dissolves, the ego goes away, and you see that connection. You experience it viscerally, but then the drug wears off, and it's easy to forget what that state is like. And so the practice develops that. And the other practices we do, the physical ones, the psychological ones, are all in support of that realization, which is what it takes to get to incorporate all the perspective and solve these things. And when we're solving problems this big, there is no other solution. It's that simple, and it's that complicated, all rolled into one.
Yeah, and it's not just it's not just meditation, it's not just psychedelics, but it's about practice. Sometimes on the tennis court, I get into zones that's just, wow, this is divine. I feel like I'm being played. It happens to me a lot when I play music, which I do a lot. And you get into flow states where the normal way of thinking just kind of goes away, and it all just kind of goes into place. And that's brought on by practice, dedicated practice. If you want to get great, whether it's in meditation or in music or in writing or in art or being a teacher, being a mother, being a parent, you have to practice.
And the problems we're facing right now are so huge and so complicated that it's easy to look at this stuff and just feel overwhelmed by it. What can I do? I'm only one person. How are we ever going to solve this stuff? There's just too much. And we give up and pray for our kids, and in some people's cases maybe regret having them, or whatever the case may be, because we don't want to leave this suffering that we are potentially heading, this cliff that we are potentially heading towards, to the future generations. So what do we do? Well, I mentioned the book I was reading earlier about this Navy SEAL, David Goggins, and the things that he put himself through. We are all capable of so much more, and we don't know what we're capable of, and we don't know what those limits are without practice, without getting in there and pushing ourselves and seeing what we're capable of and discovering that, yeah, this stuff is unbelievably hard, but we can do it, we can persist, we can endure more than we ever thought. Practice is the gateway to learning how to do that and making it from an idea that seems interesting into a reality that we have experienced. And that's what it's going to take to transform the world and solve these problems.
And it's like in the whole thing with quantum physics. And back when I was in grad school, I had the great opportunity to become a personal assistant to Fritjof Capra, who wrote The Turning Point, The Tao of Physics, and a whole bunch of other books. Tao of Physics was a big book. And Fritjof was a physicist educated in Austria who actually had a psychedelic experience and saw all this stuff. And then he started saying, wow, the things that I've been learning in quantum physics, these really strange realities, very much seem to be very similar than what we're finding in quantum physics. And this kind of, what? The disappearance of the subject-object relationship in some things. You can't look at something without affecting it. So all of science and all that modern science has done great things, done some awful things, but a lot of wonderful things, was just objective science, right? But when you get down to those basic levels of reality, that we can perceive through instruments or however we do it, that begins to break down just by looking at it. Changes the way it behaves. And so this entity can be a discrete individual particle, or you look at another way and it's a wave that goes off into infinity. And that's a great metaphor, a mind picture of what it means to be an evolved spiritual person, because I believe that as we mature as individuals, right, we become more ourselves. The older we get, we just become who we are. So if you've been fortunate enough to have some good things happen and you've really worked on yourself, you develop your individuality, your profound individuality, which you can call your personality, but it also taps into soul. That part where I think, in my mind, it's like the Venn diagram. You have the everything, the wave, then you have the particle, the individuality, which is a beautiful thing too, where they come together. You have kind of the meeting ground in the depths of ourselves, and that's our soul. That's where our deepest longings, our deepest cares, our deepest individual wisdom emerges from. So as you become more yourself, you also become more connected to the everything. Okay. And I think in a lot of spiritual paths before, very recently, well, in the West, we did psychology, individual psychology, but there's been this, especially in the East and the West too, great transcendent traditions that just focus on the oneness of the all of God and becoming one with that. And it was unbalanced either way. So if you just had just psychology or just transcendent, mystical spirituality, that doesn't solve everything. Okay. And it used to be, man, if you just become enlightened, bing, everything's fixed. And, it's just like, you're good. No, there's all kinds of post-awakening issues that are become even more in your face the more you get into it. I just, a dear friend of mine from Belgium, Hans Pulaski, had done wrote a book with and about a spiritual teacher from Israel. And this hasn't been published yet, but I'm doing all I can to get it published. It's a great book. So this weird little Israeli guy that didn't really fit into Israeli culture, goes on this quest. You go through this all adventure, and he finally achieves this kind of awakening. Behold, I am the all. And then, of course, that's when the real work starts, because all his individual stuff that he hadn't fixed up from his own ego and personality and his shadow stuff was all still there. He just had kind of this bigger thing, and actually it becomes even more prominent in these awakened states. So how to deal with the shadow issues before you have these awakening experience, and how to deal with it afterwards, because it's still there. So I think it's I don't know, it just fosters a sense of responsibility and humility to realize you will never be the end all. As long as you're a person, you have an ego, it's going to be there. And the best we can do is to make the ego, with all its foibles and wrinkles and stuff, to be the servant or the vessel or the channel for this higher, a beautiful self. But you gotta, you can't just have great music and play it on a beat up guitar that has two strings that have never been tuned and cracks in the body, just sound like, sound like crap. You have to have a well-tuned, beautiful instrument. And that's the responsibility we have to do the work. The individual ego, psychology, therapy, introspection, all of this stuff, working through the shadow, releasing the trauma, so that we can, when we do have that realization of who and what we are, and always have been at the deepest level, we'll be able to balance and mix those things in a way that doesn't just create more problems, which you see in a lot of spiritual teachers who haven't done their work, the psychological work. They end up projecting their shadow in the name of the Almighty, or in the name of enlightenment, or whatever their trip is. And it just it doesn't help.
And, there's a real danger, too, for people who are getting into spiritual practice for the first time and starting to seek enlightenment as a path to transcend the ego, because the ego is messed up and has so many problems, and I can just escape all this by letting it go and becoming one with everything. And like you said, that causes a whole host of problems. We have to realize that there is still an instrument and the strings are out of tune. We can't just throw the thing away and join the cosmic music. We're creating more problems, or we have the potential to create more problems by avoiding doing that work and trying to the phrase is spiritual bypassing. I know you're familiar with it, and I know that a lot of people watching this probably have heard that term too, but it's something really important to keep in mind, because even as we're working through our practice and growing through the levels, we can, tend to think we're more evolved in a certain shadow problem. We can think we're more further along the path, and that these tendencies, these parts of ourselves that we thought we were, feel we have evolved beyond morally, ethically, spiritually, emotionally, are no longer part of us. They're still there, and we still need to do the work to see them and work with all the aspects of our being.
Yeah, and it's pretty much important to develop a healthy ego self, especially if if you see the need and you're hungry for transcendence. And sometimes transcendence just happens, unbidden or not, bam, it's right there. But if you don't have a healthy ego structure, if you haven't done the basic works and, of realizing who you are as an individual with some self-awareness and self-reflection and, honest looking in the mirror, it's problematic. So, psychedelics aren't for everybody. I mean, there's some people that have, personality disorders that are really hard to overcome. And I don't know if psychedelics would help them. Probably not. And, and it can, the whole path, and of course we create new problems, but that becomes, grist for the mill, and one friend of mine said, you shouldn't say, oh shit. You should just say, oh, fertilizer.
Yeah.
If we consciously take these things on in ourselves and our issues, they become the raw material for further growth and further evolution and further creativity and beauty and goodness and wisdom. So it's not to be avoided. And, you know, my psychedelic experiences, I don't know, I probably had about 50-50 really beautiful trips and 50-50 really bad trips. You know, I was just brought down into giving a tour of hell and despair. And oftentimes, many times, I would start that way, then I'd work through it, or would be worked through to the point that I would come to a point of illumination. And thank God, and beauty, and then kind of the plant helpers in this case would kind of put me back together in a very gentle way. And I'd come out feeling very purified, very inspired, way humbled, way humble. It's like, okay, maybe if you have narcissistic tendencies, it's probably might be a good, painful thing to go into these altered states where you realize, you're not the top banana. You're not the top of the food chain. You're just incredibly significant and at the same time totally insignificant. You're nothing and you matter deeply. That's one of the things that comes out of this thing. How do you put that together? Well, work on it. You'll begin to understand that particular koan. So, hey, do you think we ought to wrap this for today, Doug?
Yeah. I think that it was a good exploration of this topic for sure, and I hope that people watching found some value in it too. Why don't you go ahead and leave us a comment down below that tells us your most valuable takeaway from the discussion today and the one question that is still lingering in your mind based on the things that we talked about. Also be sure to like the video and tell us what you'd like to see. Subscribe to the channel so you can see when our next video is.
Yeah, and we're just warming up our chops here. We're just getting this rolling and getting all the bugs out, seeing what we're doing and seeing if there's enough juice to run on, to keep going. All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Doug.